As of 2017, over 2,000 species of insects are known to be edible and are still being eaten today. Insects are consumed in every inhabited continent, and the diversity of consumed species is particularly high in Mexico, India, China, and Thailand. This diverse diet is a continuation of centuries of tradition. Insect eating is not new. Humans and pre-human hominids have been eating insects since prehistoric times. We suspect ancient humans ate insects mostly out of necessity, as sources of food easily collected from nature. Sweet insects like honeypot ants would have been a remarkable source of sugar, and are still an occasional, though celebrated part of the culture of certain indigenous Australian peoples. Honey, of course, is another insect-derived sweetener. 1,500-year-old cave paintings in Spain show people collecting honeycomb, a source of both honey and edible bee larvae. Large, fatty beetle grubs would have been an important source of calories for ancient humans, and other insects would be useful sources of protein, in addition to larger game. Humans ate insects as far back as we have written evidence. Locusts were eaten everywhere from Africa to India, with accounts in the Bible and other documents from this era. The ancient Greeks were fond of cicadas, with Aristotle describing the life cycle of the cicada, nymph to adult, and remarking on when they tasted best. Note that within the next 400 years, cicada eating stopped in Greece, with Plutarch writing that the cicada is too musical and sacred to eat. It should be noted that in these cases insects were not seen as a primary food source, except during famine times, but as a seasonal treat or a snack. Eating lice has been around for millennia. You have probably seen images of monkeys picking nits off each other and eating them. Well, humans have done the same thing, with Herodotus writing about louse-eating people in what is now Russia more than 2,000 years ago, and similar reports in Central Asia in the last century. However, lice are not eaten as a source of food. When asked why they eat the lice that were feeding off them, most people reply with revenge. As many cultures worldwide, from the Americas to the Arctic to Asia to Oceania, have maintained their centuries-old traditions of eating insects, there is much for anthropologists and historians to learn. In different cultures, different insects are viewed differently for different reasons. Some are prized as foods, some are used as medicine, some have cultural or religious significance, and some are seen as pests. What holds in one culture does not necessarily work in another. Termite collectors in South Africa were horrified to hear that people in China eat scorpions, for example. In the same country, different regions will be more or less inclined to eating insects. There are too many examples to go into all of them here, so if you are interested in what insects people ate or eat in a certain part of the world, you are welcome to look this up on your own. With the exception of beekeeping and silkworm culturing, few historically edible insects were farmed. Traditional insect eating often involved and involves people collecting insects on the side of whatever task they were already doing. For example, if you are fishing for crabs or small fish in a stream and you happen upon some dragonfly larvae, you might as well take them with you. If you are harvesting mangoes and you come across a red ant nest in the trees, well, why not collect the larvae as food? In this way, insects are seen as a supplement to the diet, a snack, a spice, a little something extra to add new colors and flavors to your food. In the Arctic, the Nunavut people are reindeer farmers. When they skin reindeer for their pelts, they occasionally find parasitic botfly larvae in the skin. No reason not to eat them. Apparently, they taste like milk. Children often are the ones who collect insects. They have nothing else to do, and catching insects is fun. So while the parents are out hunting or farming or doing other work, the kids can provide the insect side dishes or garnishes. Of course, hunting wild insects is fun for people of any age. In Taiwan, for example, the Formosan giant cricket lives in tunnels underground. Pour water into the tunnel to flood them, and the crickets call it out, and you can catch them, gut them, and cook them with garlic. Only when an insect population is really abundant, more so than most other sources of food, does it become a primary source of protein. A good example is the alkali fly, found in immense numbers around Mono Lake in California, USA. The lake's high pH is harsh, and few other organisms can live there, but the alkali fly has evolved to resist the caustic waters. The pupae of this fly can be collected all year round, especially in summer, just by scooping them up with baskets. The native people of this land, the Kuzetica, would collect the pupae and press them into dried cakes that could last for a long time and be traded with other tribes. These served as the main food source of the Kuzetica people, whose name itself means, in their language, larvae eaters, or eaters of the brine fly. Many insects are pests of crops. If you are a farmer who has found out that your field has been ravaged by insects, would you not want to harvest those insects yourself to eat them, so that you could at least get some food out of all your hard work? Or would you perhaps collect insects as food as a means of controlling them, rather than spraying pesticides? In practice, this doesn't usually happen. Many plant pests, like aphids and whiteflies and thrips, are too small to be much of a meal, causing a lot more damage to the plant than their small size would suggest. Some insects spread diseases that kill whole plants, so if your choice is, say, one leafhopper versus an entire grapevine, you would probably choose the vine. Other insects are poisonous or are hiding in inaccessible parts of the plant. Leaf borers, stem borers, and underground root pests are examples. There are not many cases where harvesting a pest makes sense as pest management. The same applies to medically significant pests like mosquitoes and black flies. Killing them, repelling them, or just keeping them off the body is more cost and energy efficient than trying to eat them. Mosquitoes are never going to be a big part of anyone's diet. Termites are edible and eaten all over the world, but there's no good way to remove termites from your house or furniture without destroying the wood. Better to use a pesticide spray and seek edible termites elsewhere. That said, some pests are worth collecting and eating. In Madagascar, the lantern bug is an omnipresent pest of beans, but it itself is edible. Dried and roasted, the flavor is said to taste exactly like bacon. Several stink bugs in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia are edible. As the name suggests, many are chemically defended, so they need to be prepared a certain way. Some are put into a bucket of water so that they will spray out all of their stink chemicals. When this is done, they can be dried and roasted and eaten. Many of the most desirable edible insects are themselves pests. Palm weevils are a great example. In nature, the female beetle lays eggs inside the tree, and the larvae bore through the wood, eating the growing points of the tree. This can stunt or even kill the tree, so palm weevils are devastating pests to coconuts, oil palms, sago palm, and other palm plants. The larvae are also delicious. There are many different ways to cook them, though they can even be eaten raw. So, across Southeast Asia and parts of Africa and South America, the grubs can be collected and harvested as food. Because harvesting the larvae requires cutting down the tree, there is a conflict between people who want to grow the palms for food, or wood or other products, and those who want to harvest them for insects. Pesticide treatments to kill the palm weevil exist and are great for palm farmers, but not for the insect collectors. This theme of insect collectors competing with plant farmers does come up again and again in the study of edible insects. Agave is a great example. The agave plant is a succulent grown in Central and South America, which is primarily used for alcohol like mezcal and tequila. Agave has several insects that feed on it. The larvae of these beetles and butterflies are called gusanos in Spanish, and they are edible. Highly nutritious, you can deep fry them, braise them in spicy sauce, and serve them in a tortilla. Or you can dry them and grind them with chilies and salt to make sal de gusano. Mezcal bottles for export are famously sold with a gusano inside them, allegedly as proof of authenticity, though in reality it's just a 20th century marketing stunt. The worms in the mezcal bottle these days may not even be true gusanos. A single agave plant can have several hundred gusanos inside them, and as each individual gusano is worth several pesos, a single plant can provide 1,000 to 2,000 pesos, or up to $100 in caterpillars. Agave farmers often have to invest in security for their farms during the summer rainy season to keep the caterpillar poachers out. Harvesting gusanos without damaging the plant is labor-intensive, and while some mezcal farmers will do this themselves to get extra income, others prefer to use pest control. There is a conflict, then, between those who grow the agave for alcohol and those who just want the caterpillars for food. Before packaging, preservation, refrigeration, and globalization made it possible to have tropical fruits available in Scandinavian supermarkets all year round, food was often seasonal. Different plants would be harvested at different times of year, and different animals, like fish or game, would have their own seasons as well. Edible insects are no different. In parts of the Congo Basin in Africa, where a large number of edible insects exist, many are only available at certain times of year. There's palm weevil season, grasshopper season, termite season, etc. In the Colombian Andes, especially in Barichara and San Gil, every spring locals look forward to La Salida, the exit, which is the start of the mating season of the big butt ant. The new queens of these leafcutter ants emerge at once, full of eggs to produce new colonies, and it is these queens that are collected during a few short weeks. They are high in protein, rich in flavor, and expensive, worth several times more than coffee. Some species are available less than once a year. In the east and central United States, the periodical cicada broods live underground as nymphs, sucking the roots of plants for either 13 or 17 years, before they all emerge almost at once in a massive emergence. Each brood has a unique distribution, meaning some parts of the USA will only see periodical cicadas every 13 or 17 years. While not a common part of the American diet, cicadas are edible, and a few enterprising restaurants and shops offer their very limited time cicada products like cicada ice cream that sell out in weeks and then won't be seen again for years. Seasonal insect emergences can be excuses for festivals. In Southeast Australia, Aboriginal groups from multiple clans speaking multiple languages would traditionally gather in certain high mountain caves along the Australian Alps during their summer. They were following the bogong moths, who migrate in huge numbers to these caves to estivate or wait out the hot summers. Thousands and thousands of sleeping moths could simply be scraped off the cave walls into nets, roasted to remove the scales and wings, and eaten or ground into cakes for later. Just as importantly, this was often the only time in the year when so many of these different tribes would meet in one place together, and so the collecting season became an important part of the social calendar, promoting intertribal relations. More recently, every November in Kushihara, Japan, a wasp festival is held, where people compete to see who can bring in the biggest wasp's nest. On the menu, hebo gohemochi, or grilled rice cake with a sweet sauce of ground wasps. The ability to collect and preserve foods for later is essential when you have seasons where little grows, or in case of droughts or bad growing years, or simply for mobility away from your family farmland. The simplest method is to collect insects, grind them up, and form them into cakes, with or without added flour. These are sources of calories and protein that can be transported and stored for a long time. Insects can be sun-dried, as is done for Mopane and shea caterpillars in Africa, then rehydrated in water when you want to cook with them. More advanced techniques like canning, jarring, and freeze-drying not only make seasonal insects available all year round, but also all over the world. Zazamushi is a Japanese term for the larvae of several aquatic insects like stoneflies and caddisflies that live in the bottom of the Tenryu River in Nagano Prefecture. They only emerge during winter, collected by specially authorized fishermen using special nets. They have a delicious taste, similar to river fish, but they don't last long. Zazamushi are typically cooked in soy and sugar and then stored in jars, these days mostly as a souvenir for people who visit the Nagano region, rather than as an important food for the fishermen themselves. With preservation and storage techniques, people can enjoy seasonal and/or geographically limited edible insects worldwide all year round. But there's a catch. When the people buying and eating the insects are different from the people collecting them on the lands where they live, that sets up conditions for exploitation. When people anywhere are willing to pay a premium for insects at any time of year, what will happen if supply doesn't meet demand? You may have noticed that most of the examples I gave of entomophagy so far have been of indigenous people, people in rural communities, farmers, fishermen, traditionalists. Knowing this information, I want you to ask yourself, does this make you want to try edible insects more or less? Your answer to this question will vary, but for most people, the honest answer is less. Studies on diffusion of innovations found that people are more likely to adopt innovations, including food, from people more similar to them in terms of age, gender, culture, nationality, education level, social status, etc. You are more likely to eat the same food as other people like you. The statistical likelihood that you, watching this video, are living in a remote rural area where you and others like you frequently gather insects as food is low. A related factor is, unfortunately, racism or classism. The diets associated with traditional rural populations are looked down on, seen as primitive, backward, undesirable. The sad reality is that these perceptions exist even among members of the communities that traditionally ate insects. An entomophagy enthusiast, David Gracer, interviewed Thai and Cambodian immigrants in the United States who worked or shopped at stores selling Southeast Asian foods, including edible insects, and asked them whether they themselves ate these insect products. The majority said no. They said that they used to, back when they were children, in their home countries. But now that they moved to America, they didn't eat that stuff, even when it was right there at their fingertips. This phenomenon has been widely reported all over the world. Traditional entomophagy is in decline. Part of this is simple urbanization. People are moving from forests and farmland to cities, where catching insects as food just isn't possible. Part of this is development. As people escape poverty, they tend to demand more vertebrate meat in their diet, as it is associated with wealth. The other is the spread of developed nations' cultures and food, which means people who used to collect insects for food are now more interested in eating instant noodles and processed junk food, both out of convenience and out of the desire, conscious or otherwise, to be modern. Now you might be thinking, well wait, if the Southeast Asian people selling insects in Southeast Asian food stores in the USA aren't eating them, then who is? Well, that's the irony. Right now, globally, in addition to a decrease in demand for insects from the people who ate them traditionally, we are seeing an increase in demand for insects from the people who don't. City dwellers, perhaps hoping to reconnect with their heritage, or novelty seekers, eager to try new foods, are buying the edible insects traditionally only eaten by those who would collect them. This demand is quite high, and the result is that people in rural areas who once would collect insects seasonably for their own consumption are now collecting much larger amounts and selling them in the cities for a high price, and are then using this money to buy city food like processed snacks. This has several downsides. Instead of high-protein insects, the collectors are trading them for high-fat junk food that's less healthful. The cultural aspects of insect collecting, the social functions, are replaced with purely economic ones. The collection rates increase to unsustainable levels as the insect populations become threatened due to overharvesting, potentially leading to their extinction and the complete loss of the tradition. The high demand leads to high prices, which means insect collectors could make a lot more money selling them than eating them, making a potentially important source of calories and protein for the world's poor now out of their price range. For insects collected from crop plants, like sago palm grubs or agave worms, the high price for insects incentivizes poaching or the destruction of forests for their insects, leading to conflict and possible environmental damage. So does this mean eating insects is bad for the environment? Bad for society? Well, no. The examples so far have all been from collected insects, harvested from nature. If we could farm these insects sustainably, then we could meet demand for insects in urban areas and reduce the pressure on wild populations. Now, not all traditionally consumed insects are farmable, and many will probably remain limited, available only to certain people at a certain time. That's not a bad thing. Food tourism could bring great benefits to a region. And if an economically important food insect is only found in a certain area of natural forest, that could be the impetus to preserve that forest and prevent its destruction, leading to conservation of more species. There are ways to enjoy insects sustainably. We just need to focus our attention on supply-side innovations rather than increasing demand. Insects have long been an important part of the cuisine in Mexico. The ancient Aztecs would prepare escamoles, or the brood of ants that feed on agave plants, as offerings for their rain gods. These are still collected today, traditionally by skilled escamoleros who know how to harvest nests without damaging them. With care, a single nest can be harvested 3 times a year for up to 40 years, with a kilogram of ants going for about $200. In the city of Taxco, in the state of Guerrero, the beginning of the season for humiles, or stink bugs, is marked by a fiesta on November 1st. These insects are ground into a salsa with a strong cinnamony smell. Today, chapulines, or grasshoppers, are easily the most famous Latin American edible insect. They are harvested from cornfields, where they are considered a pest, then starved in boxes for a day or two to clear their guts. Then they are boiled, sun-dried, seasoned with salt, lemon, and garlic, and roasted or fried. You can buy these grasshoppers in jars or bags or modern packages with all sorts of spices and flavorings. Mexico is a big country, and not all regions practice entomophagy equally. The main insect-eating regions are those in the south, where the descendants of the pre-Hispanic civilizations still live, in states like Veracruz, Guerrero, Oaxaca, and Chiapas, plus central Mexican states like Hidalgo. Here, most insect eating is done by the indigenous people, like the Nahuas and Zapotecos. And insects are particularly abundant components of Oaxaqueño cuisine. The agave worms, added to bottles of mezcal, are Oaxacan, and chapulines are most popular in that state as well. The incredible diversity of edible insects in Mexico has been well documented thanks to Mexican entomologists and anthropologists. Around 70 species of ants, bees, and wasps are edible, with the abundant leafcutter ants commercialized for sale in cities. The winged reproductive stages emerge in large numbers and are easily caught, bagged, toasted, and turned into salsa. Around 90 species of beetles are eaten, around 11 Mexican states, ground into pastes, or used as taco fillings. Since Aztec times, the eggs of large water bugs have been harvested and eaten as Mexican caviar. The Aztecs would harvest these by putting plant stems or leaves in the water on which the bugs would lay eggs, and the adult bugs were also edible themselves. The Aztec emperor himself is said to have eaten water bug eggs every day for breakfast. Even the conquistadors began to eat them, as, being Catholics, they were not supposed to eat red meat on Fridays, and insect eggs were a tasty alternative. This large diversity of edible insects is impressive, but there's a problem. Over 40% of these species are currently threatened by deforestation or even over-harvesting. In the past, people would harvest these insects for themselves or, at most, the emperor. Now, large amounts of indigenous people are moving to the cities, abandoning their traditional diets for city food, while people in the cities are demanding indigenous foods. So these indigenous people will return to their communities on weekends, collect large amounts of insects, and transport them back to the cities to sell for high prices. Often non-natives will go collecting in these regions too, and they have no knowledge of how to harvest sustainably. In Mexico City, insect meat is more expensive than any other meat, greatly limiting who has access to these foods. The result is that the insects are being over-harvested. Elders in the communities have reported that the seasons for these insects are shorter, and the harvests becoming smaller. When once one person could collect enough insects to last several months, the supplies now last only a few weeks. For the ant brood, escamoles, demand in Mexico is so high that ants are actually being collected in the United States and exported into Mexico in order to meet rising demand and vanishing local supply. This change in who is eating these insects, how much they are eating, and why is putting these insect populations and those that depend on them at risk. Finding a way to harvest these insects sustainably while still providing opportunities for development is a challenging task. What is modern food? How do you define it? Is it just the food people eat today? Many centuries-old traditions of eating insects are still practiced today, unchanged over time. In East Africa, along the banks of large lakes like Lake Malawi, huge swarms of millions upon millions of tiny midges occasionally form literal clouds of insects. If you take a pan, coat it in cooking oil, and wave it in the air, you'll catch these insects easily, and they can then be pressed into cakes called kunga cakes that can be grilled like burgers or dried and saved to add savory flavor to stews and other dishes. It's a burger made from insects that someone on Earth might be eating right now. Is it modern? Just as traditional food eaten in rural areas has an unfair negative stigma attached to it, so too are recently developed city foods seen as beneficial or good. Cities are where the jobs are, where the wealth is. Cities are where the innovators are, the young, the cosmopolitan, the hip, the wealthy. City food is desirable because it's from the city, and city food tends to be highly processed and packaged. As humanity overall migrates to cities, they lose touch with nature and the edible animals and plants within it. People forget their traditional foods and how to collect them, or don't pass this knowledge down to their descendants. Instead, in the city, they have supermarkets and convenience stores with foods from all over the country, frozen or dried or wrapped in plastic and available all year round. In addition, big cities also have people from other parts of the world, each with their own restaurants and food cultures. Living in the city means you have access to an incredible diversity of foreign foods you otherwise couldn't try. Can we blame city people for not wanting to eat the same food their ancestors had to eat every day? So let's move away from traditional foods and look to the present. What is modern food? And what are modern edible insects? We can define these foods as popular, eaten in cities, sold in stores and restaurants. We can also define modern food as the kind of food people eat all the time, at home with their families, as the main course of a normal meal, not as a specialty food eaten as a fun novelty or while on vacation in an exotic country. These foods should be relatively cheap and thus easily available, which means they can be sold processed or packaged, and are probably farmed. That means an established agricultural system exists, with research and extension offices present to develop new and better ways to produce these foods and share this information with farmers. Modern food is accessible, acceptable, and normal. A survey on entomophagy in Zimbabwe in 2013 found that throughout the country, less than 10% had never eaten insects at any point in their life. Edible insect production was still important in the local economy, with some insects being exported to other countries. Around 80% of those surveyed had eaten termites, and more than 90% had eaten caterpillars. Specifically, those of the Mopane caterpillar, which lives on the Mopane tree. The Mopane worm is one of the most significant edible insects in Africa. It's rich in protein, fats, and minerals like calcium and iron. And it's delicious. Typically, women and children collect the caterpillars from wild trees, pinch them at the end, and squeeze their guts out like a toothpaste from a tube. The caterpillars are then washed and boiled in salt, then dried in the sun or smoked. Dried Mopane worms can be eaten as they are for a savory snack, or rehydrated and fried until crisp, or stewed with vegetables and spices and served with African porridges. More industrially, they can be bagged for long-term storage, or canned in brine or tomato sauce. Mopane worms in various forms are thus sold all over southern Africa, and their collection and sale provides important sources of income for rural women. The industry is worth millions of rand, or hundreds of thousands of US dollars. In Western Africa, an insect with a similar role in food security and economics is the shea caterpillar. It grows on the shea trees, and is harvested and prepared in a similar manner. The caterpillar already plays an important role in rural Burkina Faso, and bags of caterpillars can be found in local stores. The caterpillar is highly nutritious, and especially contains a lot of micronutrients linked to fighting malnutrition in a region with some extreme levels of poverty. Local entomologists and entrepreneurs are working on ways to breed the caterpillars so they can be available all year round, and to possibly find an alternative food source besides the shea tree, so that caterpillars can be grown in different parts of the country. A problem the caterpillars face is conflict with those who are growing the tree itself. Mopane wood is oily, and so one of the most important trees for firewood. It's dense and termite resistant, so highly desired for construction. And the leaves of the trees are important forage for livestock, so animal ranchers that grow Mopane trees sometimes use pesticides to preserve the leaves. Shea trees have an edible fruit, and the seed is the source of shea butter used in cosmetics and food. These conflicts are not always insurmountable. Researchers found that shea caterpillar defoliation has no effect on the yields of shea fruit, meaning shea farmers can harvest fruits and caterpillars together with no costs. For Mopane, organized collectives of farmers and caterpillar collectors are trying to semi-cultivate the worms, though it is a challenge to regulate collection properly and prevent over-collecting. A very positive case is in the Zambia. The Bisa people had been collecting Mopane worms for centuries, and had been passing their accurate knowledge of the ecology and biology of the species through oral tradition over generations. They knew how to protect the trees from forest fires, and at times would restrict caterpillar collecting to prevent over-harvesting and ensure a rich harvest for all time. However, poverty, the need for arable land, and demand for the caterpillars from outside their community was leading to illegal deforestation of these critical trees, which was a problem for the Bisa and for the Zambian Forestry Department. Rather than try to enforce a blanket ban on caterpillar harvesting to protect the trees, The government recognized that the Bisa already knew how to manage the forests, and so they passed laws declaring part of the Mopane forest a protected caterpillar harvesting zone, a national forest area where both the trees and the Bisa people's practices are protected. The Bisa managed the forest, and in return, the government taught the people how to reinvest the profits of caterpillar selling back into the community. The result is a win-win situation. The Bisa keep their heritage and their land, the Mopane trees and caterpillars are protected, along with all the other animals and plants that live in the forest, and the income the protected forest generates is greater than what a clear-cut forest would have given if used as farmland. Edible insects can thus be used as a tool for both conservation and development. The goal of entomophagy activists and educators, like myself, is not necessarily to get everyone in the world to eat insects all the time. We simply want people to be aware that it's an option, and a perfectly normal one. From the perspective of entomologists, who in general want people to stop thinking of insects as scary or ugly, the idea of edible insects is a positive, because one is unlikely to eat something if one is afraid of it. And nobody should be afraid of insects. From the perspective of gourmands, or people who enjoy travel, exotic foods, and foreign cultures, edible insects are seen as a way to appreciate and experience other people's cultures, and combat discrimination and negative views of different foods. As these were the first groups of people trying to bring edible insects back to the West or to urban areas where edible insect culture had been lost or never there, the first organized insect eating events were at natural history museums or organizations like the Explorers Clubs. Nice, but not exactly places where one goes for cooking ideas. Edible insects at such places had low trialability. Yes, you could try them there, but once the event ended, would you ever get a chance to try insects again? Let's focus on the United States of America for a moment. Foreign insect products were first imported into the USA around the 1950s as exotic foods. The first insect products made in the United States for human consumption mostly treated insects as a novelty. Chocolate-covered ants, insect lollipops, candy-coated scorpions, barbecue-flavored crickets. These were products aimed towards children, as a strange snack. Nothing like the way insects are traditionally eaten. Even if you are a regular candy consumer, you probably aren't going to grab sour cream and onion flavored mealworms when potato chips are cheaper and probably more to your liking. This is not to say insect snacks don't exist in other countries. In Thailand, you can find bags of silkworm or cricket snacks not too different from bags of potato chips. Today, as global interest in edible insects is increasing, we are seeing a growing number of processed insect products in Western countries. Insect breads, insect protein bars, insect burgers, insect meatballs. By grinding insects up and combining them with other ingredients, they go from being scary insects into being a normal-looking food item that just happens to be made of insects. Modern food, for better or worse, is processed. We grind animals into patties and nuggets, fish into sticks and balls, grains into pastas and pastries, fruits into smoothies, and vegetables into soups and stews and casseroles. We like our food disguised, spiced, shaped and formed into something new and exciting and tasty. When insects are used like these other foods, when they are incorporated into modern cuisine in the same way as other ingredients are, then we can say they are becoming a normal food. Finally, for edible insects to be normal, they need to be found in normal places, where normal people go to buy normal edible birds or edible fish or edible plants. In other words, grocery stores, supermarkets, farmers markets. If you wanted to cook insects for personal consumption in the USA in the early 21st century, you'd most likely either have to order insects online or go to a pet shop to get mealworms meant for reptiles. Hardly normal. Compare this again to Thailand, where one can get fresh insects from the farmers' markets with the vegetables, and even large supermarket chains sometimes have frozen insects for sale. For eating insects to become truly normalized, the availability of insects for the everyday consumer needs to increase. When one can go to the local store and buy a pound of mealworms as easily as one can buy ground beef, or a can of caterpillars as easily as a can of peas, or a bag of cricket flour for baking as easily as one can buy any other flour. When the supply of edible insect products becomes as abundant and convenient as that of meat and grains, then and only then can we say that edible insects have become normal. And if the supply of insects is high enough that they become as cheap or cheaper than comparable foods, that's even better. Insect products don't need to be popular, and in the West, they may never become so. But it would be nice if they were more easily available for those who want them. No discussion of edible insects is complete without mentioning Thailand, easily the country most strongly and positively associated with edible insects. While other countries are losing their edible insect traditions, in Thailand, they are growing exponentially. Insects in Thailand aren't seen as a food of the past or of rural areas, but are a food of choice that people seek out specifically for its flavor. The diversity of insects eaten here is considerable. Locusts, grasshoppers, short-tailed crickets, mole crickets, stink bugs, water scavenger beetles, predaceous diving beetles, silkworms, bamboo caterpillars, dragonfly nymphs, giant water bugs. But the most prized and expensive of all edible insects in Thailand are the larvae and pupae of the weaver ant, referred to in Thai as red ant eggs or kai motang. The ants build their nests in mango trees, where they actually perform a valuable service as biocontrol, keeping the trees free from herbivores. Around February, the ants and their brood can be harvested, and are then sold for at least twice the price of beef at local fruit and vegetable markets, or canned in brine for export. The brood have a consistency of caviar, but larger, and go well in omelets or steamed with rice in banana leaves. As in other countries, entomophagy was not universally spread across Thailand. Insects are traditionally the food of Isan, or northeastern Thailand, where they would typically be fried and eaten as a side dish with other foods. Insect eating here is quite normal. Ride the train through Isan and you may be approached by a snack lady selling bags of fried locusts. Today you can find fried insects in many major cities, like in the big night markets in Chiang Rai and Bangkok. Yes, there is a touristy element to this. On stalls in the infamous Khao San Road in Bangkok, backpackers can buy insects or, for 10 baht, take pictures of them. However, insects are also being marketed to Thai people as well. The supermarkets have frozen giant water bugs. Many railway and bus stations around the country have packaged deep-fried bamboo worms or bags of fried silkworms and crickets next to the other snack foods. Insect burgers, fritters, and sandwiches are made that appeal to urban-dwelling Thai eager to try them. In Bangkok, there was a trendy haute cuisine restaurant called Insects in the Backyard, where the entire menu was devoted to insects. These were not just fried and put on sticks, but combined with other ingredients by an internationally trained chef to make dishes like silkworm tiramisu and giant water beetle ravioli. If you are buying edible insects online, especially some of the more exotic ones, there is a good chance they are coming through Thailand. Yet, in Thailand itself, demand for insects is so high that many of the most commonly eaten insects, like crickets and silkworms, are actually imported from neighboring countries like Vietnam, Laos, China, and Cambodia. Huge wholesale markets on the borders take in massive quantities of live insects, store them on ice before boiling or frying them, and then portion them out for other retailers. In addition, insect farming is a huge business in Thailand, and growing. Crickets, palm weevils, and bamboo worms are either farmed or semi-cultivated all across Thailand, and the profits generated are considerable. In fact, much of the world's insect farming technologies were first developed in Thailand, particularly at Khon Kaen University in Isan. This knowledge on how to farm insects is crucial not only for ensuring supply, but also for protecting wild populations and ecosystems that would otherwise be at risk from overharvesting. It's also great for the economy. By last count, there were over 20,000 cricket farms alone in Thailand, more than 60% of which are run by women. Specialized industries arose around cricket farming, such as special cricket feed for different cricket life stages. The government is supporting the development of insect farming and promoting it worldwide through the Food and Agriculture Organization. Knowledge from Isan, both traditional and cutting edge, has since spread across Thailand and Southeast Asia and throughout the world. With advances in preservation and transportation, food items can be transported all over the world. We forget how limited cuisines used to be before globalization, and how foods now eaten all over the world, like bananas or chocolate or tea, used to be strange and exotic, limited only to certain areas. Today, among the more innovative and perhaps affluent members of developed society, there are those who express their cosmopolitanness and open-mindedness through food. In other words, some people like eating exotic foods because they are exotic. This is part of the idea of gourmet food, which refers not only to food prepared in the highest standards of quality and presentation to maximize the sensory pleasures of eating, but also to food using rare ingredients. Now, what is rare in one part of the world may be common in another, so what counts as gourmet will change depending on where you live, and it changes with time. The idea of gourmet foods was popularized in the United States during the late 1940s, when companies like what was then Reese's Finer Foods began importing what were then considered exotic things like foie gras, artichoke hearts, and Dijon mustard, as well as some items that are still exotic today. That includes meat from kangaroos and zoo animals, as well as Japanese fried butterflies, chocolate-covered South American ants, canned hornets, and fried baby bees. Today, insects are still not as popular as mustard and soup croutons, but edible insects are still available from importers catering to people in non-entomophagous countries eager to try these delectable snacks from far-off lands. The internet has made buying edible insects quite easy, either freeze-dried or processed into a final product like insect pasta or insect candy. You should be able to find something that can be delivered to you, though you'll be paying a price for the privilege, and I guarantee you they would taste better fresh. On that note, a growing number of high-end restaurants are taking notice of the rising popularity of edible insects and are starting to offer fancy insect dishes on the menu. These range from pop-up restaurants that showcase edible insect dishes for a limited time to Michelin-starred fine dining establishments that elevate insect foods to a form beyond any way they have ever been eaten. You can search online for examples of these fancy dishes and see photos of their beautiful presentations. Sometimes the dishes are borrowing from traditional cuisines. Others are more creative. The Danish restaurant Noma, for example, has a guiding principle of only using local, native ingredients in their cooking. Since citrus plants are not native to Denmark, one alternative is to use ants instead of lemons, as ants have a similarly sour flavor. They used ants in their pop-up locations in London and Tokyo. If a restaurant that has repeatedly been ranked as the best restaurant in the world can use insects, then anyone can. A few species of arachnids, which are technically not insects, are eaten. Scorpions are fried in China, and several golden orb weaver spiders in the genera Nephila and Trichonephila are eaten in regions like Vietnam, Papua New Guinea, and New Caledonia. The most famous and interesting case of edible arachnids is the zebra tarantula of Cambodia. The zebra tarantula live in burrows underground. Children, or anyone else so inclined that knows what to look for, can reach into the burrows and pull out the tarantulas, or use a shovel or tool to dig them out. These tarantulas do not have irritating hairs like those in the Americas, and while they can bite, they prefer to run away. Once caught, the spiders are defanged and, if ready to be cooked, washed, seasoned, and fried in oil and spices, or grilled and dipped in sauces. The legs have a taste and consistency of French fries. The thorax like crab, with a delicate white meat inside. And the abdomen has its own very unique flavor. It probably depends on how well it was cooked. And hopefully, yours is a female tarantula, so the abdomen is full of eggs. Bonus! If the thought of fried tarantula doesn't appeal to you, the Bugs Cafe in Siem Reap, near the ruins of Angkor Wat, once served a battered and fried tarantula, or if you really want to disguise it, tarantula samosas. Personally, I prefer going to the local day market and buying tarantulas straight from the fried tarantula man. Much cheaper and more authentic. The tarantula has probably been eaten in Cambodia for a very long time, but allegedly its popularity today is due to the quite unfortunate circumstances. Between 1975 and 1979, Cambodia was ruled by the Khmer Rouge, a brutal communist dictatorship responsible for the Cambodian genocide, during which around 1/4 of Cambodia's population was killed. Among their heinous ideas was the goal of collectivization, in which they sought to turn Cambodia into an agrarian nation by forcibly relocating people from the cities to the countryside and expecting them to farm. Obviously, these urbanites had no idea how to grow food, and so hundreds of thousands of people starved to death. Those who survived did so by eating whatever they could find, including tarantulas. It turns out, tarantula is delicious. So after the Khmer Rouge was overthrown, Cambodians retained their taste for fried spider and still eat it today. Today you can find spiders in many major cities, including the capital. But the central nexus of the Cambodian spider trade is Skuon. Most of the spiders come from near there, and every day around 1,500 spiders are sold in Skuon, either for local consumption or to be put into bottles of rice wine and sold to China or Vietnam as medicines. The question is, how long can this last? The zebra tarantula isn't farmed as far as we know. All the tarantulas sold in Skuon are collected from the wild. There are not enough tarantulas in the Skuon area to meet demand, and so tarantulas from all over Cambodia are harvested and brought there to be sold. We don't know exactly which species are involved in this trade, and we don't know enough about their biology. We don't know what sizes they reach at their different life stages, how big the wild population is, or how rapidly it is shrinking. Both overharvesting as well as deforestation of Cambodia's natural forests are threatening the tarantula populations and leading to reduced harvests. Yet the exact scale of this is unknown. Even if the tarantulas are threatened, the trade in spiders cannot be stopped. It's too important. Thanks in part to the disaster that was the Khmer Rouge, Cambodia is one of the poorest countries in Asia, and the income provided by spider selling to Cambodia's poor is too great, not to mention the nutritional benefits. The fear is that if these questions aren't answered and the tarantula trade not managed in a way that is sustainable but still beneficial for the local people, it may not last forever.